I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love.
This morning we're going to consider a story that you all know, and it's Joseph, but only a section of his life story, and that section of the story is his time as a slave and as a prisoner. You know, children are very quick at a very young age to tell you life is unfair. You probably as a child were pretty quick to tell your parents that life is unfair. That's unfair. Even as children, we have a pretty quick sense of what's fair and what's not fair. But what is it then? How does a child define a fair life or an unfair life? And what's required of life for it to be fair for a very young child? From their perspective, for life to be fair, his way in his world, get what they want. And viewing it a little simpler than I think it's not so much getting what they want, it's making sure that nobody gets more than they do. Because you're going to measure those pieces of cake to make sure that your brother or sister doesn't get a bigger piece than you get.
So that's where adults get it, huh?
Yeah, that's it. As long as nobody gets more than I get or gets something that I want and I don't have, that they don't have something that I don't have. You know, if Susie gets a $2 a week allowance and I only get $1.50, that's not fair. No matter what the circumstances, it's just not fair. So it's a matter of making sure that I get my fair share for a child. And that's what fairness is. But for us, we have a little broader perspective. What do we require? When we talk about life being fair or unfair, what are our basic requirements about a fair life? All right, so we're a lot like the children in that respect, and that we also want to make sure that we have our fair share, and we may feel it's unfair if somebody has more than we have. More fundamentally than that, can you get down to what it might take for life to be fair for adults? I mean, what is it we expect of life to be perfect here?
Worry-free.
Worry-free? Okay. That's true. We really want that. We would like to be free of all worries. But we recognize that, there's going to be stuff in life we're going to be concerned about. But as far as fairness between us and the next guy, or us and the world in general, what is it that we want to have happen for life to be fair? What is our expectation of someone who does something wrong in a fair life? I mean, if people do bad things, if for life to be fair, what would we expect to have happen? They should pay the penalty, right? I mean, our expectation is that the wrongdoers should be punished and punished quickly. We would expect swift justice for that person who performs badly. That would be fair, wouldn't it? I mean, if that happens all the time, every time somebody does something wrong, they are punished and punished quickly. Would that be fair? And we would kind of look at that as a fair thing, wouldn't we? Well, what about people who do the right thing? Something good. What is our expectation in a fair life for that person? What should happen when somebody does something good for somebody else? Should be rewarded. And it should happen right now, right? If everybody who does something good is rewarded and rewarded immediately, Now that's fair, right? So we have a pretty simplistic view of life too, don't we? But does that happen? Are the wicked immediately punished? Are the good people immediately rewarded? Well, not in the world I live in. So we might tend to think that life is unfair because it doesn't meet our definition of fairness, does it? Just like Calvin in the cartoon and children in general are going to shout at you, life is unfair, or that's unfair, because in their world and their definition of what fairness is, that's not fair. And we have an inclination ourselves to make that same proclamation when those wicked people are not punished quickly and when the good people are not rewarded quickly, then we're pretty quick to say that that's not fair. When we say that life is not fair, sometimes people will jump immediately to God's not fair. God is unfair. How would we deal with that? If somebody does that, I mean, things are going just horribly wrong. I mean, the things that should happen just aren't happening. And that person is seeing that life isn't fair. So what are we going to say to them when they jump to that conclusion then that God is not fair?
Ask them, is God just?
Okay. Are they going to really care about that specifically? They're looking at their situation in a pretty narrow point of view and thinking about those qualities of God, His justness. I don't know that that's going to satisfy me. All right, life has been unfair to me. I'm very unhappy with the way things have been going. It's just not fair. And now I'm starting to question that, well, maybe God's not fair.
Why do you blame it on God?
Why do I blame it on God? I mean, He's in charge of everything. It's His world. He's in charge, and it's just not fair.
Which is also usually followed by, I have followed the rules. I've done what...
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I did these things. These are good things. I went out and I tried to help this person, doing everything I could to help this person, and it all blew up in my face. I didn't get a reward. I was punished for doing the right thing. That's not fair. How are we going to deal with that person? What are we going to say to that person? What's the basic problem here? And I kind of want to get at this fairly early here, because when we start talking about life is unfair, it is self-centered. It is a very narrow focus, isn't it? As I was saying here, I'm focusing mostly upon myself. But even in general, if we're talking about life being unfair, we're talking about the world as we know it in time and space, right? I mean, these three dimensions and in time as we know it. It is this narrow part. As the writer of Ecclesiastes put it, it's life under the sun. I mean, it is not a heavenly view at all. Nothing beyond what is right here in the world right now. And that's a narrow focus. And that's what, when I start thinking about life is unfair and God is unfair, that's what I'm thinking about, isn't it? I'm thinking about the world that we live in. And I like the Calvin cartoon because Calvin's father said the world is unfair. Because the world is unfair. And when we're talking about life being unfair, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the world being unfair. God is beyond that, isn't He? He is above that. He is in control of that. But if we're going to talk about God's fairness, we have to get beyond our time on this earth, don't we? Because will the wicked be punished? Will the righteous be rewarded? We are promised that, aren't we? But is it going to happen in your lifetime? God's time. We understand that when something bad happens because of something stupid that we've done, that's okay. Now, we understand that. We would appreciate something else happening, but it happens. For example, if I get drunk and I drive my car into a tree and break my leg in the process, I'm going to suffer with that for a little while. I mean, hobbling around on crutches for a while, but it's through my own stupidity that it happened. And I can understand that. I'm not going to say that life is unfair because I'm walking on crutches for a few weeks because I did something stupid. You might, I don't know. I can't do that. I mean, because I know that I was wrong, and that's okay. However, if I'm just driving down the road and someone bumps into my car and the bumper has to be replaced, and so the car's in the shop for a few days to have the bumper replaced, and maybe I have the deductible on my insurance, I'm going to grumble about the unfairness of that maybe for a little bit, because I was just minding my own business and this guy came along and popped into me, and now I'm going to have to be without my car for a couple of days and I have to pay my deductible, and that's not fair. But that's not going to bother me for very long. It may bother some of us a little longer than others, but it's generally not going to bother us very much. Now, if that same person comes along and plows into my car and it breaks my arm, and I have to walk around with my arm in a cast for a month, and then I have to go through rehab for another month, I'm going to grumble a whole lot longer about how unfair life is, because I was on my way to church to teach Sunday school, and this person plowed into me. That's not fair. And now I'm going through this pain and suffering for 2 months. It's just not fair. Well, maybe it's worse. Maybe this guy plows into me, it breaks my arm, and I have to have my arm amputated. Things like that happen. I was on my way to Sunday school to teach my Sunday school class, and here I am the rest of my life now without my left arm. That's not fair. I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Is there a point in time in general where we start moving from this life is unfair to God is unfair? I mean, the consequences of an event, sometimes those consequences are very short-lived, right? I mean, it doesn't take very long, and so we get over it. Sometimes they last the rest of our lives. And sometimes it's 10 years, 20 years. I mean, there are things that happen that impact our lives for different amounts of time. Does that make us think that God is unfair if it's for a little too long?
Yeah, you start questioning why.
Why? That's right. That's the big question, isn't it? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why did this happen to me? Because I was doing the right thing. If I was doing the wrong thing and it happened, well, that's just stupidity and I deserved what I got. Why do we think that God should make life fair for me? I think about the fairness of life, and I'm kind of concerned that everything's fair for you. But, what about these people over in, whatever country, and, life's not fair there either, but I don't care about that. Isn't that a tendency of ours? We tend to get focused, and really our primary focus is that life be fair to me. I want it to be fair to me. I want, in my life, when that person does something wrong to me, commits an act against me, then I want justice. I want him to suffer quickly. That's why we have attorneys, right? Why is that? Terry gave us the answer a while ago. We're selfish, right? We're selfish. We're all self-centered, and that's what we want. Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever asked God to be unfair?
Yeah.
When is it that we ask him to be unfair?
When we want something, maybe whether it's a job or something else, maybe there is somebody that's more qualified, but we really want it.
That's right. We want it and we deserve it. I mean, we're good. We deserve that job. We can do that job. They may be better, but God, come on. We all have someone we know, maybe a relative, maybe a friend, someone we know who is not saved, not a believer. We like that person, though, don't we? I mean, people like this. They're not saved, but they're likable people. But they're not believers, and they're not immune from doing some things that are borderline on occasion. And they're going to have a good time, and so they may step out and do a little this, a little that we wouldn't really approve of, but we still like them. They're nice people. We pray for their salvation. What are we asking God to do? God, forget this stuff. Forget this bad stuff. Come on, call them home. Call them in. Right? Is that fair? Was it fair that the thief on the cross got to enter heaven, got the same reward as people who worked their entire lives in serving Christ? You see, by our definition of fairness that we gave in the very beginning, what we want out of life is for the righteous to be rewarded immediately and for those people who are wicked or doing bad things to be punished immediately. Then we're really asking God to be unfair, aren't we? By our own definition. It's okay. We still want it to happen. You see, if life is unfair, one natural conclusion for some people is, why bother being fair yourself? I mean, if life in general is unfair, then why not just get what you want any way that you can get it? Why worry about being fair to anybody else? If somebody starts talking that way, what are we going to say?
It's uncivilized.
Uncivilized? Well, if in fact, in an under-the-sun point of view, this is all there is, what does this civilized action mean anyway? What's it matter? When we die, and that's the end of all things. Then why not make the most of the time that you have? You only go around once in life, grab all the gusto that you can. Right? If there is nothing beyond this life, then why live any other way than to grab all the gusto? So what we have to recognize is when somebody starts thinking this way, they are taking an under-the-sun point of view of the world, and they're not considering that there is something beyond what happens here. And even though the world is unfair, and life in this world may be viewed as unfair, where all the righteous people are not getting immediate rewards, and the wicked people are not suffering immediately, that doesn't mean that the rewards aren't coming, and it doesn't mean that the suffering isn't coming. It just may not happen here. I want to show you a brief film clip from the movie Smashed. Now, this is 2012, and it's rated R. You may not have seen it. It's about a young couple, Kate and Charlie Hanna, alcoholics both. All their friends are alcoholics. Their families are alcoholics. I mean, it's a sad story. Charlie is quite content to live off his family's money. Kate is a little more ambitious than that, refuses to live that way, and insists upon working. And she does work. She's an elementary school teacher. Now, they enjoy their partying, and they party a lot. They drink a lot. One night, they have a really long night of partying and drinking. And Kate goes to work the next morning and teaching her first grade class, vomits in front of the class. Hungover. I mean, she's really hungover. Children are brilliant, and so they make quick deductions of things. And they understand that young women vomiting usually means pregnancy. So they start, are you going to have a baby? Now, Kate realizes that this is a pretty good cover, so she said, yeah, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby. And so everybody's happy. Well, also, kids don't keep things to themselves. So the word spreads rapidly throughout the school that Kate is pregnant. She's not pregnant. A couple of months pass. In fact, they even throw a baby shower for her because they're expecting her to have a baby. But again, the first graders are very perceptive, and they notice that she's not gaining weight. And so they say to her after a few months, you're not getting fat. Did you kill your baby? And then they talk about abortion, and Kate very firmly says, no, she did not kill her baby, and she explains to them the difference between a miscarriage and an abortion. Well, again, children don't keep anything to themselves. And when they went home, they told their parents, of course, about the discussion about miscarriage and abortion. And one of the parents called the principal and was very upset about this discussion in a first grade classroom. So the principal has called Kate in. Kate is called in before the principal. Now, the principal thinks that, well, in fact, up until this point, she thought Kate was still pregnant. Now she thinks that Kate may have had a miscarriage. So that's her understanding of the situation at this point.
so awful. I can't keep doing this. I can't.
You want to take a day off? A couple of days, maybe through the weekend?
No, I need to be honest with you. Principal Barnes, I was never pregnant. I'm an alcoholic. But I'm working on it. I'm doing the steps. I'm really sorry, and I've been wanting to tell you the truth for a very long time. Okay? Because honesty is something that's really important to me now, and I am going to meetings, and I have a sponsor.
And so you vomited in front of children because you were hungover?
Yes.
And then you lied to them and told them that you were pregnant. This is sickening. I'm extremely disappointed in you. What you've done is completely and utterly irresponsible, and I'm afraid that I can't have you here at the school any longer.
I'd like for you to take Kate's perspective for a moment. She just got fired. Why do you think she might have thought that this was unfair for her to have been fired at this point?
She got fired for telling the truth.
Fired for telling the truth? Anything else?
Fired even though she's working on the problem.
Right? So she's been working for several months in addressing her problem, taking steps to solve the problem. And so from her perspective, this might seem unfair because she's doing what she can to fix it. However, from the principal's point of view, she was hungover when she went to class. She vomited in front of the class, lied to the class, lied to everybody. But from Kate's perspective, she probably viewed this as unfair. In fact, after this, she went to a bar and got drunk. So the relapse is not to be totally unexpected, right? I mean, you would kind of fear that if someone in that situation or condition fell into that situation. But let's look at Joseph, a story that you know, and we're going to be focused upon Joseph as a slave and as a prisoner. And actually, as we're going to see, this lasts for 13 years. Jacob, renamed Israel, has 12 sons. Joseph is the second youngest. The sons are out herding sheep, and Joseph, at the age of 17, comes back to his father with a bad report about the other sons. Now, we don't know what that is, but apparently they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and Joseph snitched on them. Tattletale. But they were not happy about this. The brothers were very upset about Joseph's actions, but things were complicated even more because Jacob, Israel, liked Joseph best. I mean, Joseph was his favorite son. And of course, he had made the coat of many colors, which was something special for the special son. Then, in addition to that, Joseph had two dreams, and he revealed those dreams to his brothers. You know, they're putting the sheaves together in the field, and Joseph's sheaf stands up, and the other brother's sheaves bow down to Joseph's sheaf. Well, the brothers are pretty quick to give their interpretation to that, and it's not a good one, and they don't like it, and they hate Joseph even more. I mean, they hate Joseph. Second dream is about the stars, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowing down to Jacob, and not only are the brothers ticked off, but even his dad is a little bit concerned about the direction this is taking, because the sun and the moon would be the mother and the father. All this is accumulated to the point where they are hating their brother Joseph. Then the brothers are out herding the sheep again, and Jacob sends Joseph out to join them, and as they see Joseph coming in the distance, they decide they're going to kill him. Well, this isn't brotherly love, and so I've called it brotherly hate, because it is about as deep as you can get, isn't it? They're ready to kill him, kill their brother. As he approaches, they take his coat off, throw him in a pit. And then as they're eating, they see some Midianite traders coming along on camels, getting ready to go down to Egypt for trading. So they get the bright idea, what we can do is we can sell him to the Midianites, and they can take him down to Egypt as a slave, and he'll be out of our hair for good, and we won't have his blood on our hands. This is pretty smart, right? This way we don't end up killing him when we don't have his blood on our hands, and everything will be cool. So they do. They sell their brother. They lift him out of the pit, sell him to the Midianites, sold as a slave at age 17. 17. And for the next 13 years, he will be a slave and or prisoner in Egypt. So the unfair treatment begins. When he's down in Egypt, Potiphar, who is the head of security for the Pharaoh, I mean, he's top dog down there with the Pharaoh. Potiphar buys Joseph and puts him in charge of his household, and Joseph is very successful, so he's given more and more responsibility and authority. And so Joseph ends up in charge of the entire household of Potiphar. So he's a slave, but he's not under a whip out in the field. He has a fairly decent position because God is with him. Still, he's not at home with his father. While he's there, Potiphar's wife notices this young man, and this takes place over a period of 9 years now. So Joseph was 17 at the beginning, and as we move along for the next 9 years, he's in his early 20s, a handsome young man. Potiphar probably is getting a little bit of a paunch. Maybe his hair is starting to fall out a little bit. Potiphar's wife is looking at that and saying, that young kid is looking pretty good. And she decides she wants Joseph. And so she tries to get Joseph to sleep with her. Joseph does the right thing, rejects her. It would be wrong to do that. It would be wrong to the master. He's put me in this position. It would be wrong to him, wrong to God. I'm not going to do it. Then one day she is alone, grabs his cloak as he tries to get away, has his robe, and she's had enough of this, and so she decides she's going to concoct a story. And she develops this false accusation of Joseph. Joseph doing the right thing, expecting to be rewarded accordingly, immediately, right? I mean, if we do the right thing, we not only want to be rewarded, we want the reward to come now. At least I do. I don't know about you. He does the right thing. She has his cloak, and so she's telling everybody that, look, he took off his robe and he was trying to get me, he was trying to rape me, and I yelled and he ran away. When Potiphar comes home and he hears the story, what do you think he's going to think? He's not going to be a very happy man, is he? So Potiphar hears this and throws Joseph into prison at age 26. So he's been a slave in Potiphar's house for 9 years. Now, that should be enough, right? I mean, that's enough of a penalty for doing nothing wrong other than maybe letting his ego get a little ahead of him down with his brothers and not taking their feelings into consideration in dealing with them. But he's been a slave for 9 years and now falsely accused, thrown into prison. That's not fair, right? We would all say that's not fair. But what we all see eventually is God is working in Joseph's life. As we saw last week when we talked about life is hard, as God disciplines us and transforms us into the character of Christ, that's a hard process. And sometimes we have to endure some unfairness as well. We don't get the results that we want in the time frame that we want, and it seems to be unfair. And in the world, it is unfair. But he's imprisoned at age 26. Now, he's in prison for 2 whole years when 2 men from the Pharaoh's court are thrown into prison. The royal baker and the royal cupbearer. Now, the baker would be in charge of everything regarding the kitchen. The cupbearer would be in charge of the vineyards and all that stuff. So these are important people of significant position in the Pharaoh's court. These men made Pharaoh angry for some reason, and he threw them into prison. It happens that God is with Joseph in prison, just as he was with him in Potiphar's house. And as a result, he's given responsibility in the prison. And Potiphar, in fact, has him in charge of these 2 royal prisoners, which may lead you to believe that maybe Potiphar started to understand his wife a little bit better and maybe thought this accusation was in fact false, because he's putting Joseph back into a position of authority. He's in charge of the royal guard, he's in charge of the prisons, he's in charge of all this stuff. These prisoners have dreams. And of course, the cupbearer has dreams about grapes, and the baker has dreams about cakes. But they're troubled by their dreams and trying to understand what the dreams mean. And so Joseph is given the gift of interpreting the dreams. And Joseph interprets the dreams for them, saying that in 3 days the Pharaoh is going to call you in, and for the cupbearer, he's going to put the cup back in your hand. You will, in fact, again be the cupbearer for the Pharaoh. But for the baker, things are not going to turn out quite as well. In 3 days, he will be hanged. Joseph says to the cupbearers, look, when you go and you're restored to your position, please remember me to the Pharaoh, because I'm here unjustly. Mention me to the Pharaoh. Let me ask, if you were the cupbearer, and you got this good news from this young Jewish prisoner about this situation, you go in 3 days later, and the Pharaoh, in fact, reinstates you as a cupbearer. Are you going to say, oh, by the way, Pharaoh, there's this guy over here in the prison who... Are you going to do that? I don't think many of us would. And you know what? The cupbearer didn't either. Cupbearer was reinstated, but he forgot about Joseph. Is that fair? Not what we expect, is it? I mean, Joseph did this good thing, helping these men understand what those dreams were going to mean, and the dreams were fulfilled exactly as Joseph told them. And Joseph had one simple request. See, it would have been hard, wouldn't it? Hey, this is the king. And he had me thrown in jail just a few days ago. I don't want to go back there, and I don't want to have happen to me what happened to the baker. I'm not going to say anything. But from Joseph's perspective, that's very unfair. Very unfair. He did everything he should have done, and there's no reward. Well, 2 years later, 9 years as a servant in Potiphar's house, 2 years in jail before these men came to the prison. Now, 2 years later, Pharaoh has some dreams. Pharaoh has some dreams about fat cows and the skinny cows eating the fat cows, and about stalks or heads of grain, fat ones and the skinny ones eating the fat ones, and not knowing what this means. And he called all his wise men in to interpret the dream for him, and nobody could interpret his dreams. So finally, the cupbearer sees an opportunity for the cupbearer. When I first read that, the first part of that, it kind of looked like he remembered Joseph, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying to the Pharaoh, I remember when you threw me into prison. And when I was there was this young Hebrew who interpreted a dream for me and for the baker. And those dreams, those interpretations turned out just exactly as he said. So maybe he can interpret your dream. In other words, he's saying to Pharaoh, wise men can't interpret this dream, but I may know somebody who can do it for you. Not to lift Joseph up, but to lift himself up in Pharaoh's eyes. So he remembers now that it's convenient. God's in control. He'll make sure that it all happens in his good time. But he is remembered. So Joseph interprets the dreams. Joseph understands that the 7 skinny cows will consume the 7 fat cows. The 7 fat cows are the 7 years of plenty that Egypt will enjoy. The next 7 years will be great years for Egypt. Crops will be wonderful, but those 7 years of plenty will be followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph goes farther and says, here's all you have to do. God's telling you this. God's told you in these dreams what's going to happen, and he's giving you the solution to your problem. The solution is that you just have to store up all your excess grain for those 7 years. And then in the 7 years of famine, you take those resources and you consume them, so the skinny cows eat the fat cows. So Joseph gives this interpretation, and Pharaoh recognizes his wise men could not give him the answer to this. Here he's getting the answer and a solution, and so he decides to appoint Joseph as head of all this. In fact, he is now second only to Pharaoh. So Joseph is now removed after 13 years of unfair treatment to now being a part of the royal court. The next 7 years, everything is wonderful. Everybody's doing well because the crops are plentiful. But then the following 7 years, you have the famine, and that's when Jacob and the other sons down in Israel having problems as well, and so they come up and get grain from Egypt, and this is where Joseph starts the reconciliation process, and the whole family ends up moving to Egypt. The last passage that I have in that section is actually 26 years after Joseph was promoted, when Jacob dies. Joseph is in his mid-50s now. The whole family's been down there for more than a dozen years. And as Jacob dies, what are the other brothers saying? We better watch out. Now that the old man's gone, Joseph may decide to take revenge on us. Even though he welcomed us all down to Egypt, took care of us, gave us food, they're still now concerned that Jacob may seek revenge for what they did. A little guilt burdening them still, and so they are expecting that Joseph might take revenge. Joseph, however, is quick to respond that no, God was in charge the whole time. Even though you meant it for evil against me, God meant it for good. He's been leading this all toward His purpose and His ends. And so Joseph gave them comfort again and did not seek revenge. You see, that's what we're asked to do also, isn't it? We have all been comforted somehow through different trials and tribulations in our lives, and we're asked to share that comfort with other people in that same kind of situation. And Joseph here is giving comfort to those brothers. The conclusion I have for you is from the last part of that great faith chapter, Hebrews 11. You know, Hebrews 11 talks about the heroes of the faith. And Joseph is in that list. But down at the bottom is the most interesting part for me, where the writer of the Hebrews talks about those men who didn't have those great successes in life. You see, Joseph had his unfairness end, didn't it? You know, after 13 years, he was put into the royal position and had a wonderful life the rest of the way. That happens sometimes. Perhaps it's happened to us where we may have had a rough spot, may have been a long rough spot, and then everything worked out. And so now we're smooth sailing. But that doesn't always happen. These men and women described at the end of chapter 11 of Hebrews talk about people who were murdered, who were sawn in two, who were hanged, who were crucified and done all these things to. All these terrible things happen to people. So they were treated unfairly for a long period of time and died. They were murdered. They did not see that success on this earth. They did not see success in this life. The world was unfair to the end. So many have been treated unfairly to the end. Many will be untreated unfairly to the end. There are martyrs today on this earth right now, people who are dying for their faith in Jesus Christ. It's unfair under the sun. Life is hard and life is unfair under the sun. But for us, what's emphasized here at the end of chapter 11, that those who by faith persevere to the end bring more glory to God even than those like Joseph who persevered for a short period of time and then enjoyed success for the rest of the way. Those who are faithful to the end, even when things don't go well, to the very end, they are the brightest stars shining, showing what real faith is. And we do it, we persevere because of the hope. The confident expectation that God will fulfill all His promises. We have that hope. That hope allows us to persevere. And we can go through anything as long as we have that hope. You lose that hope, and then life is unfair, God is unfair, and it's just not worth it. Will you go on faithfully trusting and serving God even when the life seems extremely unfair to you? See, that's our fundamental question, isn't it? When life is its most unfair, are we going to go on in faithfully trusting and serving Him no matter what? Even if it gets more unfair, are we going to do that?
I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love.